There is no love lost between the United States and Russia. In fact, the International Space Station is currently the only good bond between the two powerful countries. But that long partnership may be coming to an end. Russia has just announced that it will quit the ISS program after 2024. Meanwhile, less than 2 weeks before the announcement, Russia and the US had announced new cooperative space launches. So why exactly is Russia abandoning the space program out of the blue? Keep watching this video to find out. In 1975, a handshake in space signaled the beginning of an era of collaboration between unusual allies. The Apollo-Soyuz mission marked the first time the American and Soviet space organizations worked together in orbit. Over 100 miles from Earth, Soviet cosmonauts and American astronauts shared an embrace as their spacecraft from each nation docked in space. After many years of Cold War-era geopolitical tensions, the mission served as a strong sign of de-escalation. Decades later, the United States and Russia collaborated to build the International Space Station, which is the size of a football field and has become a lasting emblem of global scientific collaboration in space. The space station is fully functional. The station, which weighs over 1 million pounds and orbits 260 miles above the Earth, currently has 7 occupants, comprising of 3 Americans, 3 Russians, and 1 Frenchman, and propulsion nudges from a Russian module are presently stabilizing its orbit. However, it appears that this long-term collaboration will soon come to an end. On July 26, 2020, Russia has just revealed that it will retire from the International Space Station project by 2024, marking the end of an era in what is Russia and the United States' last remaining area of partnership. In a meeting with Russia President Vladimir Putin, the newly appointed chief of the country's space agency, Roscosmos, made the announcement that stated that the agency will now focus more of its attention on constructing its own orbiting station. We will fulfill all our obligations to our partners, but the decision to leave this station after 2024 has been made, the new space agency chief Yuri Borisov said. He also teased the idea of building a new Russian orbital service station, which could be ready by 2025. We will continue the manned program in accordance with the approved plans. The main priorities will be made on the creation of the Russian orbital station, said Borisov. The Energia Rocket and Space Corporation of Roscosmos exhibited a model of Russian orbital station at the Army 2022 conference, according to the state-affiliated news source TASS. The mock-up featured multiple research modules, a service platform, and a dock potential Oriole ship. Roscosmos unveiled the design for the proposed Russian space station via social media following Borisov's announcement in July, but the Army 2022 event is the first time an actual mock-up has been showcased. Roscosmos showed a module of the new orbital station. At present, RKK Energia continues to work on the draft design of the station. Russian officials have talked about abandoning the project since at least 2021, citing that the equipment on board the station is increasing safety risks. The countries involved in the International Space Station decided to keep it functional until 2024, whereas NASA plans to operate it until 2030. While the schematics for the station have been revealed, it's unclear whether or not it will be built. I think this is posturing by the Russians. They don't have the money to build their own station, and it would take several years to do it. They've got nothing else if they go this route, Dr. Leroy Chow, a former ISS commander and retired US astronaut, told the BBC. If Russia ultimately abandons the ISS and builds its own space station, the International Space Station will have to adjust to life without the Roscosmos partnership. Russia controls 6 of the ISS's 17 modules, along with the Zvezda module, which houses the primary engine system. The International Space Station also depends on frequent orbital boosts from Russian Progress spacecraft to stay in orbit. NASA will have to accomplish this on its own if Russia does not assist. NASA, on the other hand, has also been experimenting with the use of a Northrop Grumman Sinus rocket to reboost the station. This was successful for the first time in June of this year. However, the continued schism between Moscow and Washington over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as a bombardment of economic sanctions, appears to have expedited the withdrawal. Dmitry Rogozin, the former head of Roscosmos, stated last month that discussions on Russian involvement beyond 2024 are only plausible if U.S. sanctions imposed on the Russian space industry and other key sectors of the economy are eased. Russian succession from the space station can occur in several ways, with Roscosmos previously threatening to detach its modules, some of which are critical to existing lab life support and orbital station maintenance, in order to put together its independent orbiting lab. Maintaining a shortened space station would increase NASA's maintenance costs, which are currently allotted $1.4 billion per year, in exchange for an orbital laboratory that now serves primarily as a symbol of international relations, a station of limited research, as well as a nearby existential test bed for examining the effects life in space has on the human body, ahead of any missions to establish outposts on Mars or the Moon. The good news is that the United States no longer has to rely on Roscosmos for transportation to the ISS. SpaceX has been flying NASA astronauts to the ISS since 2020. The bad news is that Russia has repeatedly expressed its lack of commitment to the long-term survival of the ISS. Russia had threatened to leave the space station collaboration in 2021, citing U.S. sanctions. The situation worsened in November 2021 when Russia blew up an outdated spy satellite with an anti-satellite missile, unleashing thousands of pieces of space junk, a few of which U.S. officials worried may harm the International Space Station. The space station had to alter its trajectory to avoid the debris, which littered low Earth orbit with thousands of pieces of orbiting space junk. The test demonstrated not only Russia's capability to blow up a satellite from Earth, but also that it was apparently able to risk its own ISS cosmonauts aboard who were forced to seek refuge in emergency vehicles for many hours following the test. Things worsened even more in February, when Rogozin threatened to crash the International Space Station onto Earth. The Russian Space Agency declared the next month that it would no longer collaborate with Germany on scientific experiments on the ISS, as well as discontinue providing propulsion systems to the US on which NASA has previously relied. Rogozin also added that without Russia's assistance, NASA would have to find another way to fly back to the ISS. He recommended, quote, broomsticks this time. For these reasons, Russia's decision to withdraw was not totally unexpected. Russia's assault on Ukraine, as well as NASA's lack of reliance on Russian rockets to transport astronauts into orbit, have altered a long-running, tense space collaboration, making it appear less and less plausible. The real question is, what the Russians will leave behind if they totally abandon the station. President Biden slapped further sanctions on Russia shortly after Russian soldiers invaded Ukraine in February 2022, with the aim of degrading the country's space program. We estimate that we'll cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports that will strike a blow to their ability to continue to modernize their military. It'll degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program, Biden said at the time. In reaction to their sanctions, Rogozin, renowned for his banter and years-long Twitter rivalry with SpaceX's Elon Musk, suggested that Russia would let the huge space lab crash into the Earth. There is a possibility of a 500-ton structure falling on India and China. Do you want to threaten them with such a prospect? The ISS does not fly over Russia. Therefore, all the risks are yours. Are you ready for them? Rogozin said then. The two sections of the space station operated by NASA and Roscosmos are interdependent, and it is unknown if the station can still be functional if one of the two sides abandons the project. This is not entirely impossible, but it will be challenging. The International Space Station was originally built by NASA and Roscosmos, Russia's space agency, each controlling significant components of the space station's operations. Russia is in charge of the orbiting lab's vital propulsion control systems, which provide occasional boosts to maintain the station in an upright position and prevent it from tumbling out of orbit as Earth's gravity steadily draws it towards the atmosphere. The power supply is handled by the U.S. segment. Without Russia's assistance, that technology would have to be turned over to NASA or replaced. Tensions between the U.S. and Russia keep heightening as the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues. Just recently, NASA criticized Russia for posting 3 cosmonauts with anti-Ukrainian propaganda flags aboard the station. The flags belong to separatist forces in eastern Ukraine, which Russia invaded. The image commemorated the capture of Lysychansk, the latest city to fall to Russian forces in what pro-Russia rebels called a Luhansk People's Republic, and was tagged a Liberation Day to celebrate both on Earth and in space. NASA has condemned the flag stunt and Russia's apparent intentions to use the effort as a bargaining chip in attempts to lift sanctions. Despite the ongoing war, NASA has strived to maintain a sense of normalcy on board the space station. The agency has provided information on research experiments taking place on board the ISS and even organized a press conference to promote the first privately crewed missions to the ISS. However, the US is scrambling in the background to figure out what an ISS without Russia would look like. Northrop Grumman has offered to manufacture a replacement propulsion system for Russia, and Elon Musk has stated on Twitter that SpaceX can also assist. Some of Russia's near-term space aspirations have largely been unaffected by the country's ongoing conflict with Ukraine, at least for the time being. For instance, U.S. astronaut Mark Vande Hey returned to Earth aboard Russia's Soyuz spacecraft alongside 2 cosmonauts at the end of March 2022. The agency is still planning to transport cosmonaut Anna Kokina aboard SpaceX's Crew Dragon later this year. However, other components of Russia's space policy are now shrouded in uncertainty, perhaps signaling Roscosmos' withdrawal. Time will tell if they actually get on with their plans.